Hi, welcome everybody, and thank you for sharing your lunch hour with us. I'm Muna, I'm Jenny's editor at her publisher, and I'm just going to do a brief introduction to Jenny before we start. We'll take questions in the last 15 minutes of the talk, both online and from you all, so please think ahead. And I also want to mention that Jenny will be doing a book signing at 3:30 in the main hall this afternoon. But yes, to say Jenny trained as a medical doctor at Leeds School of Medicine and practiced at the hospital there, but soon became disillusioned with conventional medicine as it failed. It treated the symptoms, but it didn't treat the cause of disease. There was no preventative health care, and it didn't truly heal people. So Jenny turned to ecological medicine, training at the British School of Ecological Medicine.
British Society.
I do this all. I do it every time.
Everyone does it.
Practicing, she's now been practicing for 22 years, practicing medicine, writing books, broadcasting, TV work, all in the aim of just getting us better health. Jenny will talk about ecological medicine. It is about nutrition, and her first book was about nutrition and its relation to the seasons. And she's now been researching and working about this book, connecting the health of the planet with our own health. And one of the titles we talked about for this book was What's Got Into You? And that brings us exactly to the scope of this talk, which is about putting the good stuff in and taking the bad stuff out. So what we're going to focus on here is putting the good stuff in. The first chapter of Jenny's book is called Earth, Earth 1, because there's two parts to Earth. And she opens the book with the soil is alive. And I think that's the heart of what we're going to talk about here. But let's start by talking about ecological medicine. What is ecological medicine?
Thank you, Muna. So, hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Ecological medicine means two things. First of all, it means seeing the whole body as one joined-up ecosystem. Okay, so you know if you were to go to your GP with a skin rash and a breathing problem and sore joints, you would be referred to a dermatologist, a respiratory physician and a rheumatologist, respectively, none of whom would collaborate or know how to if you put them in a room together. So it's about seeing the body as one joined-up whole. It's an ecosystem. Everything's connected with everything else, so it's holistic. But it's ecological medicine in a deeper sense, which it sees the human being in the context of planet Earth. And we cannot be separate. You know, we breathe the air, we drink the water, we eat the food that's grown in the soil. So whatever happens to the soil, the water, the air, gets into us through inhaling, through eating and drinking, but also through whatever we put on our skin. And there's an awful lot of petrochemicals and toxins in the products that we put on our skin, although there are plenty of safe herbal alternatives. So ecological medicine, as you said, it's about nutrition, putting the good stuff in, but also asking why so much of the good stuff is missing, which is where it connects with farming, and taking the bad stuff out. And a lot of that bad stuff that's got into us from our polluted environment is pesticides and synthetic fertilisers. So farming, you know, conventional industrial farming is by no means the only source of the pollution that's got into us, but it is a major source. And therefore, my theory is that what farmers do, the choices farmers make, will affect our health far more profoundly than anything doctors can do. I mean, the NHS, God bless, is just tinkering around the edges and picking up the pieces. That's all it can do. But as has been said here, the reason there are 6 or 7 million on the waiting list is because everyone's getting so sick. And we need to reclaim, I think, some shock and horror at the fact that everyone's getting so sick and that young people are getting so sick. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't know any young people who were sick, and only a few older people, actually. So we have got chronic illness epidemics, right? We've got epidemics of degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, all forms of neurodegeneration, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and of cancer, and of autoimmune diseases, and endocrinological problems, and reproductive problems, including infertility, all of which, all these conditions were known but very, very rare before the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of industrialised agriculture. So we're putting poisons into the soil, we're putting them into our bodies, and conversely, This is where the synthetic fertilisers come in. If we're milking the earth within an inch of its life and forcing it to produce more and more and more with intensive farming, there are no nutrients left in the soil, and therefore there are no nutrients left in us. And I do blood tests for vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, all the good stuff that should be there. And what I've increasingly started finding is that even people who are on a good diet, they ate their broccoli and their whole grains and their eggs and fish and everything, they're still deficient because the soil is deficient. And there were some people who didn't want to take nutritional supplements, and you'd change them just to an organic diet, eating the same good foods they were eating before, but now organically grown. And within a few months, vitamin and most mineral levels would normalise because they were eating food grown in soil that had not been depleted for decades, or if it had originally been depleted, had been replenished by regenerative farming, and the nutrients are back there. And we know, you all know, because you're farmers, you can heal damaged soil very quickly. And by doing so, you grow more nutrient-dense crops and make healthier people. And, putting in the good stuff and taking out the bad stuff are two sides of the same coin, because the better nourished you are, the less access toxins from the environment have to your cells. So yes, we have detox protocols, and certainly we can get the pesticides out of people's system. But even more important is educating them as to where they came from in the first place. And mostly where they come from is non-organically grown food. So, yeah.
And to drill down a bit deeper, because all your work is based on research that you have looked into yourself, but also what you've witnessed in your clinic. What have you seen that connects illness with farming methods?
Right, okay. I mean, the most important aspect of that, I think, is that when I've seen people with neurological diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, and severe autism, and I don't mean someone who's on the spectrum like the gentleman who spoke this morning, I mean kids who are really seriously disabled and in residential care. And there is a difference. Always, I find high levels of pesticides. Now, occasionally you find them in the blood, but mostly you have to do a fat biopsy, because one of the important things about pesticides, like all petrochemicals, which they are, is they are fat-soluble. They're lipophilic. So they're not going to hang around in the bloodstream. The body's not daft. It doesn't leave toxins hanging around in the bloodstream. It sequesters them away. And where it goes is the fat, and that includes the fattiest organ. Anybody know which is the fattiest organ in the body? The brain, okay? Hence the connection with neurological diseases. But the connection is deeper than that. These pesticides were developed from weapons of war. They began life as nerve gases. So it is not surprising that their primary effect is on the neurological system. And incidentally, the fertilisers began life as explosives, also a weapon of war. And as you know, in Beirut in August 2020, they did explode. And I think it's important to know where these things come from, because what happened after the end of the Second World War was that the companies who'd been manufacturing these lethal nerve gases didn't say, do you know what, there's no more call for our product, we'll go and learn to be a tennis coach or something like that. They didn't do that. They wanted their profits to continue, so they repurposed them. And that repurposing coincided with the British government's decision that they had to be more self-sufficient in food. And their understanding of the best way to do that was to make farming more and more intensive. And they thought that you had to therefore use vast amounts of pesticides on the land. Now, there's a vicious circle here that, when it happens in obstetrics, we call it the intervention cascade. One chemical intervention leads to the need for another. So monocrop farming began. Instead of little human-scale mixed farms with the biodiversity that you all know works well on the farm, with trees and animals and all different kind of plants together. Instead of that, you get a massive field of just one crop, say wheat. If you're a pest that likes to eat that, you're going to think it's Christmas and you're going to invite all your friends and relations and eat up all the wheat crop. Then the farmer zaps you with pesticides. Whereas if you're doing small-scale biodiverse farms, you don't get that in the first place, because the very nature of polyculture and intercropping is it prevents that. However, that's what's happened, and that's why our fields are drenched with glyphosate and the organophosphates and so on. And I saw in my clinic all the people with neurological disease and many of them with cancer having high levels of this stuff in their system. And I had enough patients without those diseases who chose to be tested and who didn't. So I thought on my own clinical experience there is a causal effect here. And also because when you detox these things, and there are ways described mostly in the final chapter of my first book, but also referred to in this book, there are ways of getting these things out of people's system if they can be devoted to the programme and do all the detox methods. It's perfectly possible. You can do it, and they got better. And obviously, the earlier the stage they're at, the easier it is. So somebody came to see me with MS who was only 4 months after diagnosis. He got 100% better. Somebody came to see me 15 years after a diagnosis of MS. He got a lot better, but no way 100%. Usually what the neurologist says is, oh, the diagnosis must have been wrong in the first place. Because what they're calling MS, I'm calling pesticide poisoning, and both are correct. Okay, so I thought this was just my clinical experience and that of a couple of hundred of colleagues in the British Society for Ecological Medicine. I mean, we all had this. But clinical experience doesn't feel these days a sufficient basis for writing an authoritative book. It is actually. What's now dismissed as anecdotal evidence used to be simply called clinical experience. And that's how medics learnt and taught other medics. However, I thought, well, I'd better find some references for this. I'll see if there's anything published proving the connection. And I thought, well, if I'm lucky, I'll find half a dozen papers. Actually, what ended up happening was that I found thousands and thousands of published papers in the public domain, in peer-reviewed pucker medical journals that I'd never heard of, and most of my, ordinary GP colleagues had certainly never heard of, like Environmental Health Perspectives and Journal of the Total Environment, many, many others. There were so many papers showing very conclusively this link that we'd all seen between the pesticides being in people's bodies and severe illness. So it wasn't a question of can I find half a dozen, it was which do I select out of these thousands? And so there's quite a few in the references in the back. But I think when we're talking about toxicity of pesticides, as with toxicity of anything, we should distinguish between acute and chronic. What you're seeing in Africa and India is the children of the cotton farmers who are spraying this stuff everywhere, getting very sick and dying. What you see in this country is not so much that acute toxicity, because we don't use empty, containers of glyphosate for carrying water. They do that in India still. And if you can't read, you don't know, you can't read the warnings. Sometimes the warnings aren't there. But what we've got is chronic drip toxicity, like a tiny level of exposure at each meal when you're eating something not organically grown, minuscule, but 3 times a day, every day, for years and years. And that's why it's so hard to make the links. But the links are there, and now we're told 1 in 2 of us will get cancer, and, we're seeing kids with cancer. It didn't exist when I was a child. The first children's hospice opened in 1982. It would have been unthinkable. So it's not about ageing, it's not about an ageing population. And a lot of it is about pesticides and indirectly about fertilisers, because what they do is deplete the soil of all the crucial nutrients. Fertilisers just add phosphate, nitrogen, and as you know, the nitrogen can be added far better to the soil by, growing the pulses, the legumes, the lentils, the clover, the vetch, and so on. The plants which naturally have the nitrogen-fixing bacterial nodules on their roots. But what those fertilisers do is they force the plants to grow fast and tall and spindly, but nutrient deficient. When you look at that soil, the crucial nutrients for humans like calcium, magnesium, zinc, selenium, iodine, chromium, manganese, they're missing. They're missing from the soil. As Graham Harvey says, you produce 100 tonnes of wheat from a field when it's really only meant to be producing 30 tonnes. You've only got 1/3 the amount of nutrients in each loaf of bread. So, there's no way around this. Organic, regenerative, agroecological farming is the way to prevent the toxicity and replenish the nutrients in the humans and the farm animals, of course.
Exactly. And you say what farmers do will affect our health far more profoundly than anything doctors do. And not only is it about not using the pesticides and the fertilisers, but there are methods that will promote better crops for us.
There are, but it's not for me to teach my grandmother how to suck eggs, because you guys are agroecological farmers. You know how to do that. You know about biodiversity, about not ploughing too deeply or too often, about having multiple plants and animals all growing together, about crop rotation, about not leaving bare earth. I mean, you guys know that. What I'm here to say is you're not just doing brilliant farming, you're saving lives by doing that.
And there's also, I mean, I think this is now permeating to the mainstream by people like Tim Inspector and the Zoe Project, but also we're realising the connections between gut health and brain health through the microbiome, both of the soil and us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like the soil needs to have all its millions of bacteria working together, so does our gut. And when you lose the biodiversity in the soil, you lose the life in the soil, you lose the life and the biodiversity in the human microbiome. And yes, the human microbiome, the variety is key. I mean, I call it vitamin V, variety. It is the most important. And it's what our hunter-gatherer ancestors had lots of, and that we have. I mean, they ate like 1,000 or 2,000 different plants in a year, and we have maybe a dozen. People go to the supermarket and they choose the same few vegetables. So without that huge variety of plant input into our gut, and without the diversity of the bugs in the soil, we lose the diversity of bugs in the gut. And there are many direct links from the gut to the brain, and we call it the gut-brain axis. And partly it's simply that if you haven't got the right bugs, you can't detox anything, and therefore toxins go from the gut into your bloodstream to your brain. But there's also the vagus nerve, which carries messages directly between the brain and the gut in both directions. And all nerves have a myelin sheath, which is fat. And any pesticides or other toxins that are in there, they'll dissolve in that sheath and go straight to the brain. And the disrupted microbiome will, which is really part of our immune system. I mean, it's an organ of the body, just like the spleen or the thymus gland. So that's another way in which, industrial farming damages our brains.
And it's not just the consumers, the people who eat, make food choices. It's not just, though sadly worst of all, the farmers and farmers' children in India and other places. But you've seen an effect on farmers' health here.
Yes, I have. I've had a disproportionate number of farmers and farm workers, and there's actually there's a case history in the first chapter of the new book about the young woman who grew up on a farm, very exposed to organophosphates and glyphosate, who developed breast cancer. I mean, the good news is that she got better, and she got better without chemo or radiotherapy. But she described a farm worker on the farm as she was growing up, which was totally non-organic and purely arable and heavily sprayed, who went down with Parkinson's disease, and this would be 30-odd years ago, when he was only 43, and that's quite young. And there's no doubt that farm workers on conventional farms, I mean, we shouldn't really call them conventional, because for many thousands of years, what was conventional was regenerative and organic and so on. But industrial, shall we say, intensive farming, there is a disproportionate amount of cancer and neurological disease. There is, yeah.
And actually, when you were talking about, farmers know what they're doing, you're not really doing, what I think I found most fascinating when we started talking about working together is how the parallels you draw between the state of medicine, modern medicine, and the state of modern agriculture. Yes,
I think it's really crucial to have this big picture. I mean, one of the things I love about this conference is it's about farming, but it's about farming in the wider context of social change and the polycrises, all the things that are going wrong in our, what Colin Tudge calls, hyper-capitalist society. And in that context, I think it's really important to see what's happening in both. So medicine, just like agriculture, is a crucial activity for human flourishing, but has been taken over largely by huge chemical corporations who are flogging poison for profit. And in both cases, in the world of medicine and the world of agriculture, there's a small group of pioneers, if you like, who can see what's wrong and who are trying to reclaim their discipline for nature. You know, so within medicine, there are people trying to do alternative medicine, nutritional medicine, environmental medicine, holistic, call it what you like. We've got all these labels, just like you've got regenerative, organic, agroecological, etc. It's, you know, the impulse behind it is the same. So you've got this minority that's saying, hang on, the practice of medicine, the practice of agriculture is only going to work if we align ourselves with nature and learn from nature, not working against nature. So I think it's really important that both medicine and agriculture get out from under the grip of the big chemical corporations, which in the case of agriculture are increasingly the same corporations that are monopolising the seeds and patenting genes and all that stuff, because they want to make seeds that will only work with their nasty chemicals and chemicals that will only work with their genetically modified seeds and so on. But big pharma with a PH, right, is simply the branch of the chemical industry that's colonised medicine. And the pesticide and fertiliser industries are simply the branch of big chem that is trying to colonise farming. And I suspect in colleges of agriculture, as in schools of medicine, that they have their representatives involved not just in the obvious free lunches and obvious sales techniques, but actually embedded in education. A lot of doctors nowadays get their medical education from the drug companies. The drug companies are funding medical schools. I don't know if pesticide companies are funding agricultural college courses, but if they're not, I'll eat my hat. Ouch.
God bless the NHS.
Which is made of organically grown fibres. Yeah.
I mean, as we draw to a close with the aim of finding balance, it's not just about the health of soil, and we have Earth Part 2 in the book, and there are many other parts of being healthy.
Yes, I mean, the toxicity that we're subject to is not only coming from agricultural chemicals. Certainly we've been mining for nearly as long as we've been farming, and we've dug up a lot of metals from the earth that would be totally harmless left within the crust of the earth where they belong. So just like we've dug up crude oil and gas and so on and coal, we've also dug up heavy metals. And by the way, crude oil and coal are contaminated with heavy metals. It's just natural. They mix in the crust of the earth. So when you're burning fossil fuels, you're putting metals into the air. And I checked with the Soil Association. They won't certify a farm unless it's free of heavy metals in the soil, not just free of pesticide residues. So, yeah, the sources of heavy metals in our lives are numerous. Excuse me, and I discussed those in Chapter 2. But there's also a lot of pollution in our water, not just pesticide and fertiliser runoff from agriculture, but also all the drugs that all your next-door neighbours are taking. You know, we pee them out. And the animals that are on antibiotics, you know, and that are not organically farmed, are peeing out the residues of all the drugs that everyone's taking. And the water companies don't take that out. There's chlorine. In some places there's fluoride. And there's plastic. I've been profoundly shocked to see at least half a dozen people here, people I know to be wonderful revolutionary farmers, drinking out of plastic bottles. This stuff is not just choking the oceans. It's poisoning us. Plastic breaks down and it comes back to bite us in the environment. It's in the air, the water and the soil now. And it's implicated in breast cancer, in prostate cancer, in other forms of cancer, and in infertility, reproductive disorders, all sorts of endocrinological problems. So, you know, you can get a glass bottle and carry it around in a little padded container. So, yeah, the air, the petrochemicals, I don't need to tell you. I actually like the centre of Oxford being free of cars. I know they've done it clumsily and there's all sorts of problems on the outer ring roads, but it's nice being able to breathe the air in a city. And just, yeah, one last thing, that the petrochemicals go into the so-called personal care products. By the end of writing this book, I was starting to call them personal scare products. So your deodorant, your moisturiser, your shampoo, your conditioner, you can get safe, organic, herbal versions of all of these. But remember, your skin is an organ. It's the largest organ in the body. Don't put on your skin anything you wouldn't put in your mouth, because it gets absorbed.
To bring us back to where we started and preventative medicine, what can we do? What does that mean? And what is the role of farming?
So what we can do is prioritise eating organic. And I do discuss in the book the whole issue of, is it for the privileged middle classes? And loads of wonderful organisations campaigning to make that not the case. But I also remind us that we, in the 60s, spent a third of our income on food, and now it's down to 8%. It is about reprioritising. I have sat in the consulting room with people who've said to me, I can't afford to eat organic. Oh, can we reschedule next month because I'm going to Barbados? So a nice way to get your vitamin D. But anyway, it is about prioritising, but it's also about campaigning to make organic available to everyone, at the farm gate and farmers markets and so on. But it's also about being aware, and that's why I've written the book, of where all these sources of pollution are coming from. And what we haven't had a chance to talk about is indoor pollution and pollution in the home. Once you know what it is, you can eradicate at least 90% of it. You can stop spraying the air freshener, and you can use essential oils and open the windows and make sure your next mattress is organic, and make sure you're careful what you're wrapping your food in. And there's hundreds of tips in Chapter 7 about how to make the inside of your home safe and non-toxic. And these are all pretty simple things. But in order not to get overwhelmed, I do recommend making one change at a time. But there are plenty of things you can do to vastly improve your health and your children's health and your chances of a long and healthy life, which I feel is a birthright. We should be able to die peacefully of old age, not spend our last 10 years in some kind of hideous twilight of suffering and disability. That's becoming normalised, and it isn't. It's not normal, and it's not necessary. Masses we can do to stay healthy, and farming has a huge but not the only role in that.
Woo. I mean, what I've always loved about Jenny's work, even though she brings such a scary world to the forefront, there's such a positive message. It's so empowering. Yeah. And I think with that in mind, we probably have some questions, maybe starting with an online question, or not. Maybe we should start with the floor. There's somebody right at the second row from the back.
Sorry, I can't stay back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, hello, yes. In your book, have you made any connection with mental health and farming?
Yes, I have, but I can't see through these bright lights who's speaking. Okay, hi. Yes, I have. I have, because the brain is an organ of the body, and even though we know that many of today's mental health problems, especially among the young, have obvious social, psychological, economic causes, there is also the irreducible reality that the brain is an organ. And so the toxic chemicals like pesticides, like heavy metals, and like plastics and the plasticizer chemicals getting into the body and getting into the brain definitely have a role to play. And air pollution is particularly significant. And in Chapter 6 and in Chapters 1 and 2, I do discuss the link, and there's an appendix on it as well, isn't there, Appendix 1. I do discuss the links between agricultural pollution, other pollution, and mental illness. There is a very definite link, yes, and there's also a link between high levels of particulate matter, that's the solid bits of air pollution, and both Alzheimer's and autism. And in some countries in the global south, where there's just no regulation about the emissions from the cars and lorries, they're even seeing children with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Right, now, I should say, all this stuff is scary to know, but in my view, it's even scarier not to know it. Because if you know, you can protect yourself. You take a deep breath, face up to it, and do everything you need to put in place protection. Yeah.
Okay, yep. Here's from the outside world. Cheryl Hillier. Read divisions between agroecological methods. How do we get to zero tolerance of agrochemicals? All food could be healthy, and sequestering carbon, levelling the playing field for all farmers.
Well, yes. I mean, absolutely. Sequestering nitrogen as well as carbon, yes. Yes, all food should be agroecological. I mean, these are social and political questions which have been discussed and are being discussed in many other sessions. I mean, as a medic, I don't have much to add except, yes, absolutely, that's what we need. It's a good idea. But I also think it's not going to come from the state. It's grassroots, you know, farmers' markets, sales at the farm gate, educating people and teaching people there are sources other than supermarkets where you can go and get your food. It's all about education, and it's about every school having a garden, right? GCSE horticulture, absolutely basic, more important than maths in my view. We need arithmetic, but who needs trigonometry? Need to know how to plant food and grow food, and primary schools and secondary schools should be doing that, and teaching proper cookery as well. Food. Yeah, there's someone there.
Thank you. Is it on?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Inspiring, interesting. I just want to build actually on what was just said and what you said as well. Individual choices are obviously important. Having this gathering of people who are interested in or are producing food in ecological ways is of course important. But it is a very small minority of the land and the food that's out there.
Growing fast, though.
Yeah, but still a minority and some way to go. And I've worked internationally in these areas, so I've got a bit of a perspective on it. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of what you were talking about, the professional network that you're in and the publishing that you're doing. Do you think that you could get engaged with pushing against industry and policy positions where the industry today, for example, the chemical industry, is very much adopting the strategies that were adopted by the tobacco industry, by the oil industry, by the sugar industry. They're all learning from each other, adopting exactly the same strategies to protect their products and convince policymakers that they must continue using them. And convince farmers.
And big tech, who make the mobile phones and put up the lethal cell phone towers, are doing the same thing. They're all following the playbook of big tobacco, big sugar, as you say, which is what they do is some research will be produced saying, well, this stuff is really harmful. They bought highly paid scientists to produce dodgy, methodologically flawed research showing that there's no harm. I mean, you drill down into it, even those bought scientists haven't really been able to produce that data. Their conclusions say there's no harm. So we're being blinded by a lot of dodgy science, and the only way around that is education, but also bringing back respect for what's dismissed as anecdotal evidence, as I said before, right? Actual experience of the clinician, the patient, the person who finds that when they stop eating crap, they feel better. And it's as simple as that. And I think we have to give people back a belief in their own instincts and their own experience. But in terms of, can I work directly with those people? I don't think I can. I think some people can, and we need a broad movement, right, where some people have got what it takes to go into the belly of the beast and argue with the politicians. Other people need to defect from the system and just do their little farming community and do their own thing. Other people are somewhere in the middle. What I'm able to do is see what's going on and put it into words, and I want what I've written to be a resource for campaigners. But I'm not really good at going into the belly of the beast because I'd just yell at them, you bastards, because seriously, you need subtlety and you need to be a negotiator, and I'm not. And I think speaking truth to power has its place, but truth is not a language that power really recognises, right? Power and corruption are, and this was put to me by a really amazing Buddhist teacher when I said, why? This is in the context of Extinction, the very beginning of Extinction Rebellion. And I said to him, well, these people in power who are propagating the chemicals and the nuclear weapons, don't they care about their own grandchildren? And, why won't they stop being bad, basically? And he said, an addict will rob or kill his own grandmother to get his drug, and power is a drug. And you have to understand, this is why absolute power corrupts absolutely. The people at the top of the tree, whether they're in the corporations or governments, which is a revolving door. It's the same people, the regulatory bodies for drugs and farm chemicals are just, the industry's regulating itself. That's all nonsense. But these people are hooked on power like an addict can be hooked on heroin. They are not open to a message of love and compassion and caring for all humanity. And that's why speaking truth to power is important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I think it's more a question of building a parallel system and speaking the truth to those who can hear it, which tends not to be those in power. But I think all these different approaches to making change have a place. Yeah, thank you for the question. There was someone in the middle.
We have an online.
Oh, online,
All
yes.
in one? We've got 4 altogether. This is the second. Anthony Powell asks, is it true that weeds are better than cultivated crops, having not been mollycoddled, but fighting pest diseases, radiation, and working with soil biology?
I think it probably is, but to say that weeds are better than food crops, I mean, better in what way? I went to Fred Price's lovely farm, Gothelney Hall in Somerset, and he had oats, barley and peas, I think, or wheat, barley and peas, all growing together. And there were also weeds, what we would call weeds, planted in the wrong place, but it's not in the wrong place. So the oats and the barley and the peas were about this high, and the weeds were about that high. And they're part of the community of plants. They weren't doing any harm, providing extra cover. I'm sure they're more resilient. Yes, as you say, they've evolved to be more resilient. But the point is about variety and diversity, and it works. And I was amazed when he explained you harvest all 3 crops together, and then the machine separates them. And each, of course, take different nutrients from the soil, and each put different nutrients back into the soil. So it's win-win-win. And the weeds are okay.
We've got 2 more, but we may want to...
Should we alternate with in the room?
Hi there. Hello, is this working?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep, great. So I'm really pleased to hear what you have to say, and I think it's really interesting. And I wanted to just reassure you, I do work at an agriculture college. And we're here today on force. There's 3 of us in this room. And we're really keen to make sure we're sort of sharing the right messages with our students. Yeah. We have 200 agriculture students at Plumpton College. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they sort of are keen. They're very willing to learn. They want to participate in the industry. And what we do for them is make sure we take them to have a really wide variety of experience. And that's really important.
Great.
So I can see that we got nature-friendly farming here today. I think I've seen them.
Do you have a question? I'm really aware we're short of time.
Yeah, they come and talk to them.
Question?
So my question is, although as a college we work really sort of strongly against a number of different organisations, how can we ensure we're giving the young people of tomorrow who are in farming the right tools and not too many mixed messages? Because, as you say, we want quantity, but we also need quality.
My understanding from the research I did, I'm not an agriculturalist, was that after a couple of years, organic farming, regenerative farming produces yields as good as or even better than the so-called intensive methods that were designed to improve yields. You deplete the soil, you're going to end up with a lousy yield. So it's not just about quality, it's also about quantity. And these methods can feed the world. There's no doubt about that. But you're teaching them science, right? So let me give you a teeny bit of science to teach them, right? What the organophosphates and glyphosate do, the reason that they are nerve agents, is that they act as cholinesterase inhibitors. Okay, I have to rewind and tell you briefly how nerve messages travel through the body, from the brain to the muscles and skin and back again. Right, they travel by, the nerve impulse is electrical, and it produces a tiny chemical called acetylcholine in the synapse. That's the gap where one nerve cell finishes and another starts, and it's the acetylcholine that transmits the message. So the message goes electrical, chemical, electrical. But the acetylcholine has to do its job and then be destroyed, right? It has to be taken away, broken down, so that there's a miniature pause, a refractory period, before the next nerve message can travel. The enzyme that breaks down the acetylcholine at that crucial millisecond in the synapse is called acetylcholinesterase, right? The A's tells you it's an enzyme that breaks something down. Acetylcholinesterase is destroyed by all the organophosphates and glyphosate. Glyphosate does countless other types of damage as well, which Stephanie Seneff has detailed in her book Toxic Legacy, in which I do describe in chapter 1. But tell them that if they're putting any of that stuff on their fields, they are breaking down the enzyme, which is absolutely crucial for nerve transmission, and you end up with the system that is designed to be binary, on, off, full on, paralysed. And it manifests in a whole variety of neurological conditions that, as I say, used to be rare as hen's teeth. So just tell them that tiny bit of science.
You know, that's really interesting. The sun is the best way forward, I think, and not overgraze, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Reese Sharples is asking, do you believe that we'll see a ripple from the USA specifically relating to the reformation of our food production systems, governance and education in the UK?
Well, the USA, Leonard Cohen called it the haven of the best and of the worst. So I don't know which half of the USA you're referring to. I don't know exactly what the question means, but yeah, everything that happens over there comes over here. I mean, there's wonderful farming revolutions happening over there, but there's also Bill Gates buying up more land than the entire native population own, and God knows what he's doing on it. But this is not just about good methods of farming and nature-friendly methods of farming. This is about who owns the land, and the way that's going in the USA is pretty scary, actually.
He mentions the appointment of RFK.
Look, we've got about 2 minutes left. I'm not wearing my bulletproof vest, so I'm not going to address that question. I have things to say about it, and if anyone is interested, they're welcome to talk to me about it afterwards, but obviously the questioner is online, so they can email me and ask me about that.
Okay.
You described how much academic research was out there when you started to write your book. And there is lots from very...
No doctors have read any of it.
Well, have you got any ideas about how current academic research, let alone historical, can be better used, because it's an enormous resource that a lot of time and money has been spent on?
Yes, I mean, it's extraordinary. What there is, just like there's no trickle-down of wealth, it seems there's no trickle-down of academic knowledge. All these academics are beavering away, and not just in the West. Right? A lot of the research is from China and India, which seem to be slightly less in the grip of the chemical industry and the drug industry. And if that was taught in medical school, if people knew that stuff, it would be revolutionary. It's like I haven't been to a secret archive. It's all in the public domain. But this is a problem in medical practice and possibly, I don't know, in farming practice as well, that this brilliant research doesn't trickle down. I don't think we need more funding for research. I think the research that's there needs to be taken notice of. And that's what I've tried to do in the book. I've translated a lot of it from very arcane, difficult scientific language. I'm not saying I didn't find it difficult myself, but experts have checked that my translation is accurate into ordinary English, so that everybody can understand it, because it's there. It's not secret knowledge, and we are empowered if we know. It just would be nice if medics knew as well, and instead of throwing drugs at people, actually stopped and asked, why have you got ill in the first place?
Okay, last one. Anne-Marie Meyer, what do you think of the food quality testing or monitoring? I know the nutritional quality of food is not measured systematically, and not much testing for pesticide levels either.
Okay, so I discussed this question with two wonderful people who are actually here today. Stephanie Williamson of Pesticide Action Network, Josie Cohen also of PAN, and Nick Moll. They're all three here. And basically what I learned was there is some testing. The government does a bit. Some of the supermarkets like Waitrose and M&S actually do rather more, but it's token. And the problem is they have acceptable levels. And what they're checking, a little bit about nutrient density, but then they only know about major nutrients like iron and calcium. They don't know about zinc and chromium and manganese and the ones you need in tiny amounts but are equally crucial. But in terms of their testing for pesticides, they say, OK, it is or it isn't above the safety threshold. But in my view, the safe level of a poison is 0. Right, and they're not aiming for 0. If you want zero, it has to be Soil Association accredited organic.
Right. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
And to mention very briefly, Jenny will be in the main hall at 3:30.
3:30, signing the book. Still got doctor's handwriting. Jettisoned everything else about conventional medicine, but...